Hi, it's Mr. Johnson here with an episode of the Artist Gallery. So my students, make sure you have your art journals, your reference images, a pair of scissors, a glue stick, and a writing utensil, because today we're going to talk about one of the biggest names in the history of art. So I hope you're ready. Okay. Today's artist is Pablo Picasso. Now, Pablo Picasso, remember, my students for Picasso, you need to write down everything in the white boxes in your art journal. So that's these right here. So everything in those white boxes that pop in from the side, you're expected to write down. You may write more than that if you like. That's entirely up to you. So Pablo Picasso is a cubist, painter, sculptor, printmaker, stage designer, poet, and playwright, known as one of the most influential artists of the 20th century. So his art style is Cubism. He was born on October 25th in 1881 in Malaga, Spain. He did travel to France a bit, did a lot of his artwork in France, and he died on April 8th, 1973. So that's the biographical information that you should have in your art journal. Now look, Pablo Picasso was not the best guy. He cheated on almost all of the women he had relationships with, some of which were decades younger than he was at the time. He was known for his bad temper. When he was 12, his younger sister, Conchita, died of diphtheria, which is a barking cough, which must have been horrible for him. But as an adult, he was not only known as a genius artist, but also a notorious jerk. In 1900, he moved to France, speaking almost no French at the time. But by the end of his life, Picasso created over 20,000 paintings, multiple of which have sold at auction for over $100 million each. So here's a little video that I would like you to watch.
I think it's fair to say there's art before Picasso, there is art after Picasso, and it is not the same. It's completely transformed. The Spanish are a wonderful culture, and they have an interesting concept called the duende. And the duende is sort of like a benevolent demon that visits upon certain people and gifts them with an amazing artistic genius. And Picasso really believed that he had the duende. And in many cases, he would create a work of art and sit back and contemplate that work of art and not even know how he created it. It's one reason why he didn't talk a lot about his work and about his creative process, because he was as amazed as was everyone else when looking at his work and imagining how he created it. Picasso was unequivocally a genius, and he started very early in his work. If one visits the Barcelona Picasso Museum, you'll see very early works by him as a child that are astonishing. Picasso's father was an art teacher, and he recognized his son's genius at a very early age. Artistic prodigies are rare. In music, they're more common because music's very self-contained, but art's very ephemeral. Art's very elusive from that standpoint. So visual prodigies, artistic visual prodigies, are extraordinarily rare, and Picasso certainly comes to mind as arguably the greatest of all time. Picasso also worked in just about any medium you can imagine. Of course, he worked in painting and sculpture and ceramic and drawing and watercolor and pastel and monotype, etching, lithography. It just goes on and on. Between 1958 and 1963, Picasso revolutionized printmaking through the medium of the lino cut, in which he carved away the negative spaces of the linoleum to create these groundbreaking graphic masterpieces. In terms of his ceramics, he conceived of an idea of making editions of ceramics, taking ceramics, creating an image, and then making multiple examples of the same image, working with the most famous atelier in the south of France in Vallauris at the time, the Remy foundry. And Picasso produced 633 individual editions of ceramics in the beginning in 1947 to the end of his life. During the 1920s and 30s, Picasso entered his neoclassic period in which he focused on the purity of form and created entire visual mythologies, many of these based on his personal life at the time. Regardless of the medium in which he worked, the name Picasso is synonymous with power, imagination, and virtuosity. It's very hard to imagine another artist ever again in human history being as influential, magical, or powerful as the great Pablo Picasso.
I love that introduction to Picasso. I think it's a fabulous video. It shows so many of his artworks, and it touches on a lot of elements that I think are really important to understand when you talk about Picasso. One of them is this look at his very early art. So Picasso, when he was only a teenager, he mastered realistic painting. That video mentioned that Picasso's father was an art teacher. When Picasso was only 13, he surpassed the abilities of his father, and he'd already become better than him. These two paintings on the screen, Self-Portrait and Science and Charity, were painted when Picasso was only 15 and 16 years old. Look at the incredible amount of detail in these images, the way the light hits the subjects, the use of color. I mean, this is often what paintings look like when a master has been painting for 30 years, and yet the artist was only a teenager at the time. Now, this is the first image that you should paste into your sketchbook. This is The Old Guitarist by Pablo Picasso. And Picasso went through periods of art in between realism and cubism. So those images we just looked at as a teenager when he mastered realistic art, and then the cubism that he becomes famous for. He does a lot of art in between, including art in a blue period and a rose period. So this, The Old Guitarist, was painted in 1903 and is considered one of the most iconic images from Picasso's blue period. So the blue period is not only all about the color blue, which you can see all over the image, everything is just about tinted with blue, but it's also about the emotion blue, the feeling of sadness, isolation, and melancholy. So if you look here, this is a guitarist, someone who is playing that guitar out on the side of a street. We've got a curb that's right behind him in the bottom edge of the building. This is someone who has obviously gone through a lot in his life. If you look at his clothing is all tattered. His fingers are long and spindly. You can almost see some of the bones. He's really hunched over, which shows that sadness, both in, I think, the figure's expression and in the image as a whole. And Picasso really works in this period using shades of blue. So even the guitar, which we know that is likely brown, has been tinted with blue paint so that it all ties together. And the blue in the man's skin is the same as the blue in the background, and the stripe on the building at the bottom is the same as his clothing. So I think this is a beautiful, very sad painting that Picasso does, showing this figure who's likely poor, maybe homeless, out on the street playing this guitar. It's beautiful. Okay, this has to be one of Picasso's most important works, and it's the second image that you should include in your sketchbook, so make sure you're pasting this in and then taking the notes in these white boxes. This is Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, or The Young Ladies of Avignon. This was done in 1907 and is considered the beginning of Cubism. So this painting shows 5 women who are prostitutes, and they are posing kind of in an entryway for customers. You can see the woman on the top right corner is entering through this blue curtained opening. So perhaps there's a doorway and a curtain is hanging there and she's walking through that. The other women are posing for customers, and there's a little bit of fruit at the bottom because you've got prostitutes, why not also have a fruit salad? So this is the beginning of Cubism, where Picasso was not interested in directly representing life, but analyzing it and showing things from different angles at the same time. His subjects become a lot more geometric. His colors become bolder, and he shows a great influence from African art. So you can see all of these things in the image. If you look at the figures, they've been simplified and stylized, broken down really into basic shapes. Their torsos are shown as triangles, arms as ovals or pointed, football shapes. Incredibly simple shapes, bright and bold colors, strong brushwork, and then the African influence you can see in the faces of the women. So on the two women on the right, Picasso came into possession of some Iberian sculptures and some African totem art, which greatly inspired this particular image. Some of those artworks which had been stolen from the Louvre Museum in Paris by an acquaintance of his. So the two women on the right look like they are wearing ancient Iberian masks and have features of these totem figures from Africa that Picasso would have studied. But this is the image that really started the Cubism movement. And when it was first displayed, people didn't really know what to think. They kind of hated it. They thought it was bizarre, strange, terrifying. So let me know what you think of it. This next image is one that I think is really beautiful. It's called Girl Before a Mirror. And it's a painting of a young woman named Marie-Therese Walter. And it was done in 1932. It's currently on exhibit in the MoMA, Museum of Modern Art in New York City. So if you head into New York, you can see the original painting shown there. So what Picasso has done is really broken down his subject into geometric shapes and is trying to show it from multiple angles at the same time. So the geometric shapes are easy to see. There's circles and ovals and rectangles and stripes all over the image. But if you look closely at the face, let's look on the left side. You've got the white area shows a woman's face in profile. So we're looking at it directly from the side. But the yellow area showing that same face from the profile and also from the front, which you obviously would not be able to see both of those at the same time, but Picasso is showing that to us. This style is called synthetic cubism, where it takes the idea of cubism, which is breaking down its subjects into geometric shapes, and it adds bright colors, patterning, almost looking like collage. So you can see all these beautiful patterns and colors in the background, and even in the figure with these stripes. This painting, there's a lot of talk about what it's about. You have a woman on the left who's looking at her reflection in the mirror, which is what we see on the right. And the reflection does not look the same as the woman does. So what might that mean? Is it talking about your self-consciousness, where you look in the mirror and you don't see yourself the same way? Is she seeing herself older in the mirror? We're not exactly sure, but all of these ideas kind of play into this painting, which I just think is really fun. The Weeping Woman is an image that you do not have to include. I just wanted to show you another example of this type of painting. This is a woman who's crying. Her tear is running down here at her cheek, and she's got either a handkerchief or something like that up to her face. We can both see the handkerchief and her face through it. So Picasso is showing both of those things at the same time. And these two portraits of Dora Maar, which were done in 1937, you also do not have to include, but they might just give you the sense of Picasso's Cubism style explorations. The figures are broken up and reassembled in visually interesting ways. Look how we see the face in profile and from the front view in both of these paintings. And look at how the features on the faces don't line up, especially the purple portrait on the right. Now, I want you to think back to the first few images that we looked at of Picasso's early artwork. He's not painting this way because he can't paint realistically. He's choosing to purposefully stylize his subjects to create visual interest. The colors, shapes, lines, textures are all exaggerated and become more about the sculptural quality of the forms and less about the likeness of his subjects. I only imagine the response that the woman had when he finished the painting and Picasso said, "This is what it looks like." And she thought, what? So it was more about abstracting the subject to make something that was visually interesting. Now, this is the last image by Picasso that we're going to look at, and this one you do need to include in your art journal. It's perhaps his most famous artwork. This is a giant mural called Guernica. And this painting was done in 1937 in response to a particular moment that happened during the Spanish Civil War. So what happened was the town of Guernica was bombed by Nazi soldiers during the Spanish Civil War. And Picasso was asked afterwards to create a painting about this event. And this is what he does. Now, this is a huge mural, and it is all done in black and white. But Picasso chose to paint the devastation and terror and chaos and trauma that happens during an event like this, and not paint the specific event itself. So there are no references to the actual town of Guernica, the Spanish people, or the Nazi bombers or explosions going off. You don't see any of that. What you do see are kind of these terrified images. There's a woman crying on the left, holding what appears to be a dead child. There's bulls, horses that have been stabbed with spears. There's a soldier that looks like he's dead and being trampled by the horse on the ground with a broken sword. Over on the right, there are figures running and crying. There's a figure with their arms in the air all the way on the right side, yelling up because the building is on fire. You can see flames peeking out on top of the doorway in the top right corner. So he's shown chaos and terror without depicting the actual event. Now, this was a horrible bombing that happened. It was in the middle of a marketplace during the day. So the bombs killed women and children and innocent men and business owners. It was absolute chaos. So the black and white images here, Picasso said he wanted to feel like a newspaper, coverage of an event. It's stark and it's bold. Now, amidst all the chaos, there is elements of hope in here. Picasso did not want it to be solely negative. So if you look in the center at the bottom, there's a little flower that's growing right behind the soldier's hand with the broken sword. So Picasso was showing that this is a terrible event. There's chaos and trauma, but this flower is growing, right? There is hope that comes after this. I think this is a beautiful way to depict a really horrible event. So you have a journal prompt here. I'm going to move my screen. The Picasso journal prompt is this: do you think Guernica is still relevant today, this painting? And how could this painting relate to current events? So after you've pasted in all of your images into your art journal and you've written down the notes in those white boxes, I want you to make some space for this journal prompt. Tell me what you think. Is Guernica still relevant today? And how could this painting that was painted right in the 1930s, how could this painting still relate to current events? Thank you so much for watching the video. If you have questions, please let me know, and I will see you soon.